Travis Whitmore adjusted the strap of his worn-out messenger bag, shifting his grip on his 5-year-old son's small hand as they navigated the crowded subway stairs. Zachary, his little boy, was chattering about dinosaurs, completely oblivious to the exhaustion weighing down his father's shoulders. It had been another long shift at the auto shop, another paycheck that barely covered rent, another day of pretending that everything was fine. Then, just as they reached the top of the stairs, a woman in an expensive-looking coat struggled with a baby stroller, her arms full of shopping bags. The stroller was stuck, one of its wheels caught on the uneven pavement. People brushed past her, too busy or indifferent to help. Without thinking, Travis let go of Zachary's hand for a moment and grabbed the stroller, effortlessly lifting it up the last few steps. "Here, let me." The woman turned, startled, and for a second, Travis was struck silent. She was stunning dark eyes that held a sharp intelligence, full lips slightly parted in surprise, and an air of confidence that made her stand out even in the sea of people around them. "Oh," she said, blinking at him, "thank you." "No problem." He set the stroller down smoothly. Inside, a baby with chubby cheeks and wide, curious eyes stared at him. "Cute kid." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "That's Lily." She adjusted one of the bags in her arms before glancing at Zachary, who was now clinging to Travis's side. "And this is..." "Zachary," Travis said, ruffling his son's hair. "We were just heading home." She nodded, shifting her attention back to him. "Well, I appreciate it. Most people just keep walking." "Yeah, well," Travis exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know what it's like to juggle too much at once." Something flickered in her expression, something unreadable. Then she stuck out her free hand. "Rowan Davenport." He hesitated before shaking it. "Travis Whitmore." Their hands lingered for a beat longer than necessary before she pulled away. "Thank you again, Travis." He nodded, ready to walk away, but Zachary wasn't done. "Dad, can we get pizza?" Rowan's lips twitched. "That sounds like a solid plan." Travis chuckled. "Yes, if only my wallet agreed." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and for a second he regretted it. But Rowan didn't look uncomfortable. Instead, she studied him as if she were trying to figure something out. Then she did something unexpected. "How about I buy you both a slice? Consider it a thank you for helping me." Travis blinked. "That's not necessary." "No, but I want to," she said simply. "Besides, I could use some company." Zachary looked up at him with hopeful eyes. "Please, Dad." Travis sighed, then gave Rowan a wary glance. "Are you sure?" She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't just polite, it was warm. "Absolutely." The pizza place was small, tucked into the corner of a busy street, but it smelled amazing. They grabbed a booth, and Rowan ordered without even glancing at the prices, something Travis wasn't used to. As they ate, Zachary talked endlessly about dinosaurs, and to Travis's surprise, Rowan actually listened. She asked questions, nodded at the right moments, and even made a joke about T-Rex arms that had his son giggling. Travis studied her, trying to figure her out. She was polished, put together, and clearly came from a different world than his. And yet, she didn't seem uncomfortable sitting in a cheap pizza joint with a struggling single dad and his overly excited kid. "You're good with him," he said after a while. She glanced at Lily, who was happily gnawing on a piece of crust. "Try, parenthood is a learning experience." "You doing it alone?" The question slipped out before he could think better of it. Rowan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, Lily's father isn't in the picture." Travis understood that all too well. "Same here, Zach's mom left when he was 2. She looked at him, then really looked at him. "That must have been hard." He shrugged, had to keep going, no other choice. For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was understanding. Then Zachary tugged on Rowan's sleeve. "Can I have another slice?" Rowan laughed, signaling to the waiter. "You can have two." Travis shook his head, but there was amusement in his eyes. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, and the way she looked at him sent something unfamiliar through his chest. They finished the meal, and when Travis reached for his wallet, Rowan shot him a look. "Don't even think about it." He sighed but didn't argue. Instead, he helped her get Lily settled back into the stroller. "You need a ride." She hesitated, "Actually live close by." "Then let me walk you." She studied him for a second before nodding. "Okay." As they walked, Zachary and Lily both dozed off, leaving just the two of them in comfortable silence. The city lights flickered above, the streets quieter now. "You really didn't have to buy dinner," Travis said eventually. She shot him a sideways look. "You didn't have to carry my stroller." He huffed a laugh. "Fair enough." They reached a sleek apartment building far too expensive for someone like him, and Rowan turned to face him. "This is me." Travis wasn't surprised. She looked like she belonged in a place like this. "Thanks for the walk," she said softly. "Thanks for the pizza." She hesitated, then did something unexpected. She reached out and squeezed his arm. "Take care, Travis." His breath caught for a second, but before he could say anything, she was already pushing the stroller inside. He stood there, watching her disappear into the building, wondering why the hell his heart was still racing. And why he already wanted to see her again. The next morning, Travis was elbow-deep in engine grease when his coworker, Danny, nudged him in the ribs. "You're distracted," Danny muttered, tightening a bolt under the hood of a sedan. Travis wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "I'm fine." Danny scoffed. "Yeah, then why'd you just try to put that wrench in your pocket?" Travis glanced down, realizing Danny was right. He sighed, tossing the tool onto the workbench. His mind had been elsewhere all day, replaying the night before, specifically, the way Rowan had looked at him before she disappeared into that high rise. "Something on your mind?" Danny pressed, raising an eyebrow. Travis shook his head. "Nothing important." Danny grinned. "Ah, so it's a woman." Travis shot him a dry look. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Danny said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You got that look, the one guys get when they meet someone who actually makes them think." Travis didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the car, but his mind was still stuck on Rowan. She was different, not just because of the expensive coat or the high-end apartment. There was something about her, a sharpness, but not in a cold way. She was warm in a way that felt rare, like she understood things most people didn't. "Listen, man," Danny continued, leaning against the workbench. "If you're still thinking about her, maybe you should do something about it." Travis exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't even know if I'll ever see her again." Danny shrugged. "Then you better hope fate's on your side." Fate, apparently, was listening. That evening, as Travis picked Zachary up from school, he caught sight of a familiar stroller near the entrance. Rowan was crouched down, adjusting Lily's tiny jacket, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. Zachary spotted her first. "Dad, look, it's the pizza lady." Before Travis could stop him, his son ran up to Rowan. She looked up, surprised, then smiled when she saw who it was. "Hey, Zachary," she greeted. "Did you have a good day at school?" Zachary nodded enthusiastically. "We learned about volcanoes." Lily babbled in her stroller, reaching out a hand toward him. Zachary stepped closer, offering her his dinosaur keychain. She gripped it with a delighted squeal. Travis approached more slowly, unsure if he was intruding. Rowan met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her expression. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Same here," Travis admitted. "You live near here." She nodded, Lily's daycare is just down the street, was picking her up. There was a brief silence before she tilted her head slightly. Are you always in a rush, or do you have time for coffee? Travis blinked. Coffee. Rowan lifted one shoulder. I owe you another thank you for yesterday. You already bought dinner, he pointed out. Then consider this my way of evening the score, she countered. Zachary tugged on his sleeve. Can we go, Dad, please? Travis hesitated, but something in Rowan's expression made his decision for him. All right. The cafe was small, tucked between towering office buildings, the scent of roasted beans filling the air. Rowan settled into a corner booth, adjusting Lily in her lap while Travis helped Zachary arrange his hot chocolate. So, Rowan started stirring her coffee. What do you do, Travis? Mechanic, he said, leaning back in his chair. Been fixing cars since I was a teenager. She nodded, as if filing that information away. Do you like it? Travis considered that, then shrugged. It pays the bills, most of the time. Her lips pressed together, like she understood more than she was saying. And Zachary, he seems like a smart kid. He is, Travis said, glancing at his son, who was currently showing Lily how to dip a cookie into hot chocolate. Keeps me on my toes. Rowan watched them for a moment, then turned back to Travis. It's not easy, is it, doing it alone? Travis exhaled slowly. No, but I don't really have a choice. She studied him, her gaze searching before she spoke again. What if you did? Travis frowned. What do you mean? Rowan hesitated, then set her cup down. I run a company. His brow furrowed. A company. A pretty big one, she admitted. And we have an opening in our logistics department. It's not fixing cars, but it pays well, better than most mechanic shops. Travis stared at her. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity, she corrected. No strings attached. He let out a short laugh. You don't even know me. I know enough, she said simply. Travis shook his head. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Rowan countered. It's a job, one that could make things easier for you and Zachary. His jaw tightened. I appreciate it, but I'm not looking for handouts. Rowan exhaled, studying him carefully. Then don't think of it as a handout. Think of it as a favor, one you can pay back someday if it makes you feel better. Travis didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to people offering help without expecting something in return. Before he could say anything else, Zachary tugged on his sleeve again. Dad, Lily likes my dinosaur. Rowan glanced at her daughter, who was waving the small keychain in the air. Travis sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I need to think about it. Rowan nodded. Take your time. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then, Lily squealed and Zachary laughed, and the tension between them softened. And for the first time in a long while, Travis wondered if maybe just maybe he didn't have to do everything alone. Travis had spent the last 2 days turning Rowan's offer over in his head, wrestling with the conflicting emotions it stirred. On one hand, the job could be a way out of the constant financial strain, a chance to give Zachary more than just the bare minimum. On the other, it felt like stepping into a world that wasn't a world where people like Rowan thrived, while people like him barely scraped by. But despite his hesitation, he found himself dialing the number she had scribbled onto a napkin before they parted ways at the cafe. Rowan answered after 2 rings, her voice smooth but slightly surprised. Travis. He exhaled, gripping the edge of his kitchen counter. I'm in. There was a pause, then a note of satisfaction in her tone. Good. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'll have my assistant set everything up. Yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess I'll see you then. Looking forward to it, she replied before the line went dead. Travis stared at his phone, wondering what the hell he had just gotten himself into. The next morning, he stood outside Davenport Enterprises, adjusting the cuffs of the one button-down shirt he owned. The steel and glass building loomed over him, its pristine facade reflecting the early sunlight. He felt out of place, like a mechanic who had wandered into a boardroom by mistake. Steeling himself, he walked inside, where a polished receptionist greeted him and directed him to the elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, Rowan was already waiting for him. She assessed him quickly, her gaze flicking over his shirt and the way he had made an effort to look presentable. "You clean up well." He let out a dry chuckle. "Don't get used to it." She smiled, then motioned for him to follow her down the hallway. "Come on, I'll introduce you to your supervisor. You'll be working in logistics, mostly overseeing shipments, making sure everything runs smoothly. It's not car engines, but you might find it interesting." Travis nodded, absorbing the information as they walked. "I'll do my best." "I don't doubt that," she said, stopping outside an office door. "This is where you'll be." Inside, a man in his 50s looked up from his desk and stood to shake Travis's hand. "Travis Whitmore, welcome aboard. Rowan told me you're sharp and hardworking." Travis shot her a glance, surprised she had spoken about him at all. "I'll try to live up to that." Rowan's lips twitched as if she'd expected his reaction. "I'll let you two get started," she said before stepping away. As she left, Travis couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a job. That somehow, stepping into this building meant stepping into her world. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. 2 weeks passed, and slowly, Travis found himself adjusting. The work was different from the physical labor of repairing cars, but it had its own rhythm, its own challenges. Surprisingly, he didn't hate it. What he hadn't expected was how often he crossed paths with Rowan. She was everywhere in meetings, in the hallways, sometimes even stopping by the logistics floor to check on things. Each time, she acknowledged him with a nod or a brief exchange of words, but there was something unspoken between them, something that lingered in the air whenever she was near. One afternoon, as he was reviewing a shipment report, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered, expecting it to be something work-related. Instead, Rowan's voice came through. "Do you always work through lunch?" He glanced at the clock, didn't realize it was that late. "Come to my office," she said. "I have something for you." Travis hesitated before muttering, "All right." When he arrived, Rowan was seated behind her desk, 2 takeout containers in front of her. She gestured for him to sit. "Figured you might need a break." He eyed the food. "You didn't have to do this." "Consider it a welcome to the company gesture," she said, handing him a container. He opened it, the rich smell of pasta filling the space. He took a bite, reluctantly admitting it was better than anything he could have afforded. Rowan watched him for a moment before speaking. "How's the job treating you?" "Not bad," he admitted. "Didn't think I'd like it, but it's not as terrible as I expected." She laughed softly. "High praise." He smirked. "Well, I'm not used to wearing a dress shirt. Feels weird." "Give it time," she said. "You might surprise yourself." They ate in silence for a few moments before she set her fork down. "How's Zachary?" Travis wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Good. He's been asking if we'll run into you again." Rowan's expression softened. "I like him. He's got a good heart." Travis glanced at her. "So do you." She stilled for a fraction of a second before looking away. Not everyone would agree with that. "Then they don't know you," he said simply. Rowan met his gaze, something unreadable in her expression. Then she exhaled, shaking her head with amusement. "You're not like most people I work with, Travis." "Yes," he leaned back. "That a good thing or a bad thing?" She smiled. "I haven't decided yet." They finished their meal, but as Travis left her office, he couldn't help but feel like something between them had shifted. and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that either. Travis adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, standing in front of Rowan's office door. He had been summoned, though not in an official capacity. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind late nights at work, quiet moments in the break room where Rowan would randomly appear with coffee, and stolen glances across boardrooms. Something was changing between them, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to stop it. He knocked once before stepping inside. Rowan was by the floor-to-ceiling window, her arms crossed, the city stretching endlessly behind her. When she turned, there was something guarded in her expression. "You've been avoiding me," she said without preamble. Travis exhaled, shutting the door behind him. "Been busy." She arched a brow. "You work on the same floor as me, and yet I haven't seen you outside of meetings. That's not just busy." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Rowan." "Don't," she interrupted, stepping closer. "Don't push me away when I know you feel it too." His jaw tightened. Of course, he felt it. Every time she walked into the room, every time she looked at him like he was more than the man he had always seen himself as. But there were things she didn't understand. "You live in a world I don't belong to," he said finally. Her gaze didn't waver. "You care about that." "You should," he muttered. "I'm not some guy with a trust fund or a polished resume. Fix things, Rowan. That's what I do. That's what I've always done." She took another step, closing the space between them. "And what if I don't need someone with a trust fund? What if I need someone who sees me as more than the CEO, more than the woman who has to make impossible decisions every day?" He swallowed hard. "You don't even know what you're asking." She searched his face, her voice quieter now. "Then tell me." Travis let out a slow breath. "I have spent my entire life making sure Zachary has what he needs. I don't get the luxury of chasing things that aren't guaranteed, and you—" He hesitated. "You are the definition of uncertainty." Her eyes softened. "So is love." His chest tightened at the word. Love. He hadn't let himself think about it, hadn't let himself acknowledge what had been growing between them. But now that she had said it out loud, he couldn't escape it. Rowan reached for his hand, her grip steady. "I know this wasn't part of your plan. It wasn't part of mine either. But I don't want to pretend this isn't real." His fingers tightened around hers before he could stop himself. "And if it ends badly?" She tilted her head slightly. "Then at least we'll know we tried." The fight in him wavered. She was relentless in the way only someone who had built an empire could be. But she was also honest, and that was what undid him. Travis lifted his free hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "This is dangerous." Her lips curved slightly. "So is driving too fast, but sometimes it's worth it." He huffed out a quiet laugh before shaking his head. "You're impossible." "That's not a no," she pointed out. He exhaled, then before he could talk himself out of it, he leaned down and kissed her. Rowan didn't hesitate, her hands sliding up his arms, pulling him closer. The city blurred behind them. The only thing that mattered was the way she fit against him, the way she tasted like coffee and determination. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "So, what now?" Travis let out a breath. "Guess we find out." And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was falling. He felt like he was finally landing where he was meant to be. Travis wasn't sure what to expect after that kiss. Maybe some awkwardness, maybe second-guessing. But Rowan didn't hesitate. The next morning, she found him in the break room, handed him a coffee, and sat across from him like nothing had changed except everything had. "You drink it black, right?" she said, sliding the cup toward him. Travis eyed her, then the cup. "You remembered." "I pay attention," she said simply. It was strange, the ease between them. He wasn't used to this. Things in his life had never come smoothly, but Rowan wasn't forcing anything. She was just there, as if she had always been meant to be. Still, he had his doubts. Later that day, he pulled Danny aside in the loading dock, needing a second opinion. "You ever been with someone who's completely out of your league?" Travis asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Danny arched a brow. "You asking for a friend?" Travis shot him a look. Danny laughed. All right. Look, man, I've been married 15 years. My wife's the smartest woman I've ever met. Some days, I wake up wondering why she picked me." Travis frowned. "That doesn't answer my question." Danny leaned against the railing. "Maybe not. But here's the thing, you don't have to be in the same tax bracket to be in the same league. If she sees something in you, who are you to argue?" Travis exhaled. "Feels like a bad idea." "Yeah," Danny shrugged. "So does letting a good thing slip away." Travis didn't have a response to that. That evening, he picked up Zachary from school. His son was unusually quiet on the walk home, kicking small rocks along the sidewalk. "What's on your mind, kid?" Travis asked. Zachary hesitated. "Are we going to see Miss Rowan again?" Travis considered his answer carefully. "Yeah, I think so." Zachary brightened. "Good, she's nice." Travis stared ahead, his grip tightening on Zachary's hand. "Yeah, she is." The next time he saw Rowan outside of work, she surprised him. It was a Saturday, and he had just finished fixing up a neighbor's old truck when he heard someone clear their throat behind him. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag, only to find Rowan standing there in jeans and a sweater, holding a bag of takeout. "You just show up at people's houses with food?" Travis asked, raising a brow. She lifted the bag. "Depends on the person." He shook his head, stepping aside to let her in. Zachary, upon spotting her, immediately launched into an excited retelling of his latest dinosaur discovery. Rowan listened, nodding in all the right places while Travis observed. She fit here in a way that didn't make sense. After dinner, when Zachary had fallen asleep on the couch, Rowan turned to him. "You're still overthinking this, aren't you?" Travis exhaled, leaning against the counter. "You're not exactly an easy thing to not overthink." She stepped closer, resting a hand on his chest. "Then stop thinking." His hands found her waist, pulling her in. "You're impossible." "You like it." He didn't argue. As the weeks passed, their lives intertwined in ways he hadn't expected. Rowan wasn't just a presence at work, she became a fixture in his and Zachary's life. She showed up with groceries when she knew he was too busy to shop, helped Zachary with school projects, and somehow made space for herself without forcing it. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching Zachary drift off to sleep, Rowan turned to him. "You know, I never thought I'd find this." Travis glanced at her. "Find what?" She hesitated, then smiled softly. "Something real." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Yes, me neither." And for the first time in years, Travis didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the world alone. He had someone to share it with. Travis had never been the kind of man to believe in fate. He had spent his life relying on hard work, on pushing forward even when the odds were stacked against him. But as he stood in Rowan's apartment, watching her move through the kitchen with effortless ease, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, some things were meant to be. She had invited him over for dinner, something that had slowly become a routine between them. Zachary and Lily were playing in the living room, their laughter filling the space, while Rowan stirred a pot on the stove. The warmth of the apartment, the scent of simmering spices, the quiet hum of domesticity, it all felt dangerously close to something real, something permanent. Rowan glanced over her shoulder. "You're staring." "Just thinking," Travis admitted, leaning against the counter. She set the spoon down and turned to face him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "About what?" He hesitated before answering, the words heavier than he expected. "About how fast this all happened, how easy it feels." Her expression softened. Does that scare you? He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. A little. She stepped closer, tilting her head slightly as she studied him. You think things have to be hard to be worth it? That's how it's always been for me, he said, voice low. Rowan reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. Not everything has to be a fight, Travis. He looked down at their joined hands, at the way she fit so effortlessly into his life. I just don't want to mess this up. You won't, she said simply. We won't. The certainty in her voice unraveled something in him. He had spent so long bracing for disaster that he had never considered what it would be like to just let things be good. Before he could respond, Zachary ran into the kitchen, his face lit up with excitement. Dad, Lily wants to watch the dinosaur movie. Rowan laughed, stepping back but not letting go of his hand. I think that's our cue. Travis squeezed her fingers before releasing her, something in his chest settling. Maybe, after everything, he had finally found something that didn't need fixing. A few weeks later, Travis found himself standing in the center of Davenport Enterprises, feeling completely out of his depth. The company was hosting a gala, a formal event filled with executives, investors, and people who had probably never had grease under their fingernails. Rowan had invited him, and though every instinct told him he didn't belong, he had agreed. Now, as he adjusted the cuffs of the suit she had insisted on getting for him, he felt the weight of 100 judging eyes. Then, Rowan appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Everything else faded. She was stunning in a deep emerald gown, her hair swept back, her confidence effortless. But it wasn't just the way she looked, it was the way she carried herself, like she belonged in a world of wealth and power, yet still managed to make him feel like the only person in the room. She descended the stairs, her eyes locking onto his. You clean up well. He exhaled, shaking his head. You're unbelievable. She grinned, slipping her arm through his. Come on, I want to introduce you to some people. As the night wore on, Travis did his best to keep up with conversations about mergers and stocks, but most of the time, he found himself watching Rowan. She was in her element, but every few minutes her gaze would find his, as if silently reminding him that he belonged there too. At one point, she pulled him onto the balcony, away from the crowd. The city stretched out before them, glittering under the night sky. All right, she said, turning to him. How bad was it? Travis exhaled, loosening his tie. Not as bad as I thought. She smirked, told you. He shook his head, leaning against the railing. This is your world, Rowan, not mine. Her expression grew serious. You're wrong, my world is wherever you are. His breath caught at her words, the weight of them settling deep in his chest. Before he could say anything, she reached into her small clutch and pulled out a small velvet box. Travis blinked. What is that? She opened it, revealing a simple but elegant silver band. A question. He stared at her, his heart pounding. Rowan. I love you, she said, her voice steady. And I don't want to wait. I don't care about traditions or expectations. I just want you. So, Travis Whitmore, will you marry me? For the first time in his life, he was speechless. He had spent so long believing he wasn't enough, that love like this wasn't meant for him. But here she was, proving him wrong in the best possible way. He let out a shaky breath, then took the box from her hands and pulled the ring out. You beat me to it, he muttered. She arched a brow. Is that a yes? Instead of answering, he slid the ring onto his finger. Then he kissed her. The kind of kiss that didn't need words, that answered every question, that sealed every promise. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Guess that means we're engaged. He huffed out a laugh. Yeah, I guess so. And for the first time in his life, Travis didn't feel like he was chasing something just out of reach. He had everything he had ever wanted, right here in his arms. 2 years later, Travis stood in the backyard of the home they had built together, watching as Zachary and Lily chased each other through the grass. Rowan appeared beside him, slipping her arms around his waist. "You're staring again." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just thinking." She smiled, leaning into him. "About what?" He looked down at her, at the woman who had changed everything. "About how I never thought life could be this good." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Believe it." He did. Because for the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was home,